Israeli President Herzog held phone calls with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and opposition party leaders Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz Monday evening, urging them to start immediate negotiations to reach a compromise deal after Netanyahu agreed to temporarily halt the coalition's judicial overhaul. After 12 weeks of massive demonstrations across Israel and intense international pressure, the premier said he would delay votes on the remaining legislation until after the Knesset's Passover recess to give time for a, quote, real chance for a real debate. But he indicated that the pause was only temporary, insisting the overhaul is necessary. Herzog requested that each side establish negotiation teams so that the talks could begin. Gantz phoned Netanyahu after his speech, praising his decision and expressing his willingness to hold negotiations. Despite the halt, protesters carried on through the night, with some turning into clashes with police.
Out of national responsibility, out of the will to prevent the rift in the nation, I've decided to suspend the second and third readings of the law in this term of the Knesset in order to allow the time to reach that wide consensus ahead of legislation during the next Knesset.
If he tries to do a maneuver, he'll find hundreds of thousands of patriotic Israelis who are committed to fight for our democracy and to be a defensive shield for the country. But if the government engages in a real and fair dialogue, we can come out of this moment of crisis stronger and more united.
I oppose this government and I will continue to oppose it. But with everything related to the security of the state and the law and order of democracy, I will support any right move wholeheartedly. No to civil war, no to divisions, yes to agreement and dialogue.
Continue protesting until these reforms are completely dropped, because this isn't a set of reforms. This is a coup by the executive. It's an executive aggrandizement.
It's time for a change. The people elected a government, and we want this government to rule, and not for the Supreme Court to elect itself. The people want the government to elect the court, from the left and from the right. This is how democracy works.
Key Israeli allies welcomed Netanyahu's announcement. For the United States, the delay represents an opportunity to create additional time and space for compromise. That's according to the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Meanwhile, in an interview to Israeli radio this morning, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Tom Nye says Netanyahu will likely receive an invitation to the White House following a delay amid the judicial overhaul. The Biden administration has stressed the shared democratic values between the United States and the Jewish state.
So we welcome this announcement as an opportunity to create additional time and space for compromise. Compromise is precisely what we have been calling for, and we continue to strongly urge Israeli leaders to find a compromise as soon as possible. We believe that it is the best path forward for Israel and all of its citizens to find this compromise. Democratic societies are strengthened by checks and balances, and fundamental changes to a democratic system should be pursued with the broadest possible base of popular support. And so that's what we're going to continue to call for.
Earlier, I spoke to Ambassador Daniel Shek, former Israeli ambassador to France, on his analysis of the current political situation. Take a listen.
So it was a speech of surrender, in a sense, because just a week or 10 days ago, he flatly rejected everything that he himself now proposed. He just caved under the pressure. And, you know, there's not an accusation. I think he did the right thing. But I wonder why we had to get to this, to virtually shut down the entire country. But I think between feeling the pressure from the streets and from the unions and from private sector and from the military, plus, you know, the international atmosphere and looking at polls, I think that he decided that he needed a pause. And a pause is all he gave. He didn't say anything about backing down from the subject matter, the substance. The problematic part here is that there are actually not two parts to this conflict. It's a triangle. You have the government, Netanyahu and his Minister of Justice. You have the opposition leaders, Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, and you have the protest, the street. And the street and the opposition leaders are not one. The demonstrators don't feel necessarily represented by the political leaders sitting in the Knesset. So I honestly don't know. I think there is probably room for some kind of bringing at least the parties closer to each other. I remind you that President Herzog had already presented the outlines of a compromise, which were flatly rejected within minutes by Netanyahu and Yariv Levin, his Minister of Justice. So if this will be the starting point of the negotiation, I honestly don't know how much chance this will have this time. Maybe Netanyahu just wanted to buy some time to, to breathe.
So how are Israelis feeling about it all this morning? Well, let's cross over to correspondent Pierre Klochendler, who's in Jerusalem. Pierre, what are you hearing from locals there this morning?
Well, most people are a bit after a hangover from two demonstrations that were mass demonstrations. Those who in support of Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial reform and those in opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial coup. And that has not been solved, but there is time for respite. There is a sigh of relief maybe that the strike is over, that people are going to be able to prepare for the Passover holiday and for the memorial days that will ensue the Passover holiday, with the crowning at the end of next month with the Day of Independence, the celebration of Israel's independence. But the big question is, what Israel are we talking about now? Are we talking about a Jewish first and mildly democratic state, or are we talking about a democratic liberal state with a Jewish component in it? And this lack of shared values that has been agreed, that has been argued, advocated by the US administration, the shared values between the US and Israel, is not necessarily reverberating inside Israeli society in terms of common values at this moment. The ethos of this country is deeply fractured, and people sense that. So there is time for self-examination, for reckoning, but at the same time, no one knows if the dialogue will bear fruits in the coming weeks. People are very skeptical. Some say that this is done by Benjamin Netanyahu in order to render those who protested the judicial reform more apathetic, more listless, in order to be able eventually to pass that set of laws. No one knows, but the protesters are saying that they will not stop the protest, and already calling for a mass protest on Saturday evening in Tel Aviv and across the countries. Will that call be heeded by the people? No one knows, and we'll know probably on Saturday evening.
Pierre Klochendler, thank you for that breakdown.